Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. Greetings, Happy New Year, and welcome back to another episode of Don't Fuck This Up. It's 2024, it's a fresh start for all of your fuck-ups, and it's the first episode of the new year. Today, I could not be more proud to introduce our guest. From Paris to Dakar and even a stint in the Bay Area, we are sitting down with truly a global creative force. It's writer, creative director, and cultural expert, Massaër Ndiaye. Massaër, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Lauren.
Yes.
Nice to be here.
Great to have you. And I mean, before we get into it, there's a lot I want to talk to you about. I've been waiting for this interview. But let's just start off with the easy stuff. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm in Paris right now. It's sort of cold and rainy today, but it's been sunny this morning. So yeah, I can't complain. The year is winding down. The holidays are, everyone is wrapping up their year. So it's like the energy. I think everyone is just like, with everything that's happening in the world right now. There's people are reflecting back. So, I'm the same. I'm watching the news that are terrible, and I'm antsy, and, I'm really aching to be with family in a few days and stuff like that. So as many people must be, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think it definitely is worth saying that, this year feels a little different, holiday time. And I think, how much news can you take in? How much time for yourself to unplug, because we have to find that balance. And it's been hard. It's been admittedly really hard. So, I appreciate you being honest about that too.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think, it has been hard for, it's been hard for like a lot of people from, but I think that like last year was an outlier, but this year I think people will be very, very excited to see their own. And when you see, children on TV and, not to get too dark, but like, that's the reality. You're like, yes, it's time for me to go hug my parents and my nephews and nieces and cousins and like everyone, and just like appreciate the privilege you can have, in being with family at, in times like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really incredible. And again, like, I appreciate the vulnerability. And also, to be fair, it's similar weather here in LA if you want to be. It's actually kind of cold and rainy here. So I'm just going to pretend I'm in Paris. I'm going to mentally be there with you. That sounds way better.
Well, welcome to Paris then. Like I was always, I always assume that like LA weather is like surfing weather, that everyone is in shorts and, like living the life. So
yeah,
so
I wish.
If it's cold and damp, welcome to the club then.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that there's a lot, to pull from, even you saying like wanting to go home, and, you've been truly a global, creative, really working in so many cities. I mean, from Paris, being, in your native country of Senegal, but also, working in Amsterdam. You've worked in the US and some of the largest cities like New York and, in the Bay Area. And so I would love to hear kind of for you, like coming up, is it a natural path to go into career, in Senegal? I don't know. So what was that like for you? How did you sort of come to being interested and attracted to the creative world?
I mean, I think it's a great question, and I'm going to take a lot. It seems like I'm going to take a lot of time, but I think it's like serendipitous. So I was born in Paris. My parents met when they were students. I think my dad had my dad was a teacher. So he had like a very noble idea of teaching, and he wanted to go back to Africa, as soon as he was done, and him and my mom were done with their theses. So after that, we went back to Senegal, and I don't know that I was destined to be working in like anything creative, but I don't know that I was not either. Like my mom is a huge music fan. My dad is a huge music fan. I think both of them loved movies. So very early on, I was able to, to be brought, to the cinema, like going to like a lot of, like concerts. And I was very lucky, and that's something you look in retrospect, but my parents were like living, in front of a museum. So there was
That's
like we were
incredible.
actually live. Yeah, that is incredible. You actually live in the backyard of a museum growing up. So we were literally playing football when there were like exhibits happening. So you basically soak in culture without knowing what you're doing.
Mm.
I think my mom was very adamant in having us be in cultural activities, like whether at the museum or like at this thing called the Centre Culturel Français, which was the French cultural center, just for us to be able to go and rent comic books and renting books, but like mostly comic books at the time. Uh, my parents were fairly strict, but my mom wanted us to have something other than TV.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when I was a kid, I would love television. So I loved TV and I loved watching sports and whatever was happening on TV. And she was like, "There's no TV during the week, but I could have as many books and images as possible." So that was like a fertile, soil for me to be able to be curious and like be able to, watch, read magazines, watch documentaries, everything that was like knowledge based. I feel like I had a pass. So very early on, I had that, and just being around, you know, my parents, their friends, people who were into the arts was very enriching,
Mm.
and I, for the life of me, I don't know why, but I started writing very early, like not as I don't know exactly why, but I just started writing at 11 or 12. So when just, making up stories, short stories, writing, stuff like that. So my path into creative was always writing. And as I was the oldest child and from I had a bunch of cousins who were older than me, but like from my maternal grandmother's side, I was the oldest. So I could only hang out so much with my cousins. So my older cousins were much older from my
Mm.
dad's side. And I would get like, cassettes from like, American hip hop from my cousins who were living in the US already, or, like cassettes from Dragon Ball Z from my cousins who were in France and who
We
were
all
like,
have those naughty cousins supplying
yeah,
us with the cultural information.
absolutely. The zeitgeist at that
Yes,
moment,
exactly.
whatever you need, like they're getting you the illest or the latest manga, Japanese manga, anime, and stuff. So just you're getting shots of culture,
Mm.
and Senegal when I was growing up was really cool because we had a lot of obviously having been an ex French colony. Um, you also had a lot of American influence. So we were getting, culture with not only with the cultural, soil and what was happening in Senegal, but we were getting a lot of pop culture from all sides and a lot of sports from all sides. So that was really interesting. We had a lot of rap groups at the time in the city. It was like really just a very culturally diverse and culturally vibrant city. So that was a moment, and I remember being younger and understanding that this is not normal. This is, like everyone that I knew at the time was doing something that was like, there was some sort of a renaissance, I guess, in my high school. I mean, I was not part of them, but there were like two very popular rap groups that literally did have, records in the streets. So but they were older, but still we were looking up to them and be like, wow, they're on TV. But there was that part, and I just was always writing, and I know that I was encouraged. I had my seventh grade teacher, sixth or seventh grade teacher, Madame Studère. She was a French lady, and she was like, "Oh yeah, you need to be writing." Then I had another one, Madame Boconde, who was Mrs. Boconde, who was a history teacher, and she was like, "Oh yeah, you're a really really good writer." And I remember her telling me like that I should not go into math for like my to graduate with like a math major. She was like, "Why would you do that?" So I remember her like very early on, her telling me that I should keep writing, that I had a talent. And at the time, when you're young, you just want to do what you want to do. So
Yeah.
and I was lucky enough that my parents were, they actually asked me what I wanted to do, which was, they could have. I had good grades, and that was that was the main, the principle for them for me to be good in school. But like they just did want me to be happy at some point. So they did let me, and choose the wrong path for me. But like, I
What was the
did.
wrong path? What
I
did
mean,
you
I
first
went.
choose?
No, I chose math as a major in high school. So it was math. Like, I, I don't know exactly how it works in the U.S., but like just you pick subjects, and then your specialties are the grade out of 20 is actually multiplied by a coefficient. So it's like math was 9, sciences like so physics and chemistry were like 6. Biology was 6, philosophy was 4, English 4, French 4, whatever. So it was like just like science were a bigger number.
Yeah.
And that was your specialty. So you go there, and that's how you graduate your high school. So that was a wrong path, because I just went into a specialty, into something that I did not want to do. Like all my friends, even to this day, have, my both of my best friends are either architects, engineers, pilots. So that's the path they wanted to do, which I really did not want to do anyway. But I did go there, and then when I went into college, it was I went into law school because my dad
Mm.
was a law professor, and once again, at the time, it was very weird that why I chose that. I don't know. I was enamored with the idea of like being a lawyer. I think
Yeah.
in the U.S. a lot of people love Atticus Finch,
Mm.
so want to do that. I don't know that I had like a fictional character that wanted me to be a lawyer. I know that I did an internship when I was 14 in a law firm, which I loved.
What did you love
So
about it?
I don't know. I mean, I just felt like I was an adult. Like they brought me
Yeah.
to the justice, to the tribunal. I was, they like the outfits, which, sorry, in Senegal, people had the same robes,
Oh,
and
so
not
there's a
like
very specific outfit for the
there's a very
courthouse.
specific, absolutely. There's a courthouse outfit that is like, pretty dignified, and then you see like the white, like they have this white tie. It's 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 a thing. So you look at it and you're like, oh, I mean, I actually like the fashion of this. I actually like um the sartorial side of this. So that
Yeah.
was, I don't know, when you're 14, I don't know. I wanted to be Michael Jordan for a while. So you don't necessarily understand that, like, when you don't have necessarily a passion, you just want to do a bunch of things. But hey, so I went, and so I went back to France again. It was like I was supposed to go to the U.S., but then 9/11 happened, and Senegal was in the list of countries that, well, where you could not come back. You could not come to the U.S. because we did not have like the right passports, and then that took a while. So my parents, since my dad did his, and my mom both studied in France when we were when I was born, they were like, okay, let's go to France and then see what happens after a few months and stuff. So I came here, and and I I enrolled at university at the Sorbonne, and I did my studies. But like it was not something that I chose. It was just more something that I had to adapt to.
Yeah.
And credit to my parents, they were like pretty, like they rolled with the punches, even though, like,
Yeah.
when I look back at it, I was like, oh, it's funny because, like, 9/11 changed a lot of things in real life for people, but there's also, like, I'm sure, like, thousands of people who are in my situation, coming from other countries, that could not, that were not allowed in the US at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just kept with the writing. And when I started university, I was very fortunate that Le Monde, which is a publication in France, like a very big one, was very close to my university. And then I went in there for an internship to just to write, and I think they said no once, and then the second time they sort of gave me some sort of like an internship that was unpaid, and it was
You're
great
like, if
because
I
all
keep
that.
showing up, can I work?
It was not even that, because I think that they like the level, the amount of people that actually apply is nuts. It's like the New York Times. It's like it's the biggest newspaper we have. Um, but it was just that I feel like I just went through the window, and then at some point they were like, sure, like just, send us stuff you wrote. And I just, I remember lying and saying that I had written a bunch of things. I did write a bunch of things, but nothing in like music reviews and, and concert reviews. And then I sent a bunch. I came in and then they were like, okay, so, we're going to give you this, this internship. And then once that was written, I just got an email address. And then like that email address was like a pass for like, 2 or 3 years, because you would just send an email address to get like free entry into concerts. And that was all I wanted. And funny enough, since like I have my uncle was living in the city, but he was living in Canada at the time. I had family, but like they were like in the outskirts of the city. So I was back in Paris and with very limited, access to my friends and family. So I had to, basically build my own family for a few years. And then the first months, like just being able to have like to be culturally fed was amazing. So I had this thing. There was this magazine at the time in the city that would, show you all the concerts that were there. And I would just like find, that was before internet was heavy. I would just find the address and, and like just like tell them, can I be on the list? And then I just started doing that. And I barely got like 3 or 4 pieces published. It was just a way for me to be in those places. And it was amazing, because at the time I did not even use those powers for evil. It was just like, I want to get a spot in the concert and stuff. So, but I just kept on writing. And then at some point in 2006, I think 6 or 7, I don't know. I had an internship at the Fader magazine, but that didn't pan out. But I got to New York, and the intern, they were like they said yes, and then they said no, and then thank God I got a friend of mine, like, who's still a mentor of mine and has his own agency. He's like has a very big magazine right now called Victory. Christopher Eisenberg. I don't know why. We were talking before, and then he was like, yeah, if you come to New York, you can intern for us. And then I just interned for him, and it's like the love was crazy. And then like the amount of things that I learned from him was insane. We still talk to this day. We still, hopefully we're going to work, together in the future. But that was like the first time someone actually trusted me.
Yeah.
And
that's a really powerful moment. I mean, someone hands you the baton and they say, do this thing. And you're like, okay, I've been saying I can do this thing for a long time, but like now I kind of got to do it. So that pressure can become something really beautiful if you make the best of it. And it sounds like you had already bolstered your confidence just on your own accord, but then you had to embody it. What was that like for you?
I mean, it's always interesting when someone tells you, I trust you.
Yeah.
And you're like, you don't know me. So I could actually, not pan out. But I think that he had this, I think he's a very good judge of personalities and characters and stuff. Yeah. So he just was like, yeah, you know what, pull up. And I pulled up, and they just, I don't know how useful I was at, in the beginning. That was my first time being in a real corporate environment, even though that was not as corporate as someone would imagine. It was very it was very much the self-starter mentality, or startup mentality. And he was just like, yeah, do this and do that, and help us do this and help us do that. And I was an extra set of hands, but I had a, fairly, functioning, brain. And one of the things that was interesting was that he opened my perspectives as to what a job could be. Yeah. Because at the time he had a clothing line, and he was a Condé Nast writer, but just understanding brand partnerships and how brands work and how brands strategies work. And he did he did this thing where he created like a, part art, part, brand sponsored event with Ricky Powell, the famous photographer, the fourth Beastie Boy, God rest his soul. And he was, it was just like a very, like a very actively culturally weird, but like in the zeitgeist of culture and music and basketball. And I was like, man, like this is, people are getting paid to do this. And then like, what do these brands, take away from this? Just like so you started to understand something when you're not even 20. You're like, oh, that's interesting. And then I met people from brands, people who were like, who respected his taste so they were like intrigued in like what I was doing, in those places. They're like, yeah, this French guy from like, who's like very young kid. And it was just like interesting because he never shied away. There was never like, like you're here to make, photocopies and use the
Yeah.
Xerox machine or like coffee. And he was just always introducing me as like his coworker, which was a lot. That bolsters your confidence, as you say. It's like, I think it's a very big vote of confidence. And also you have to repay that because, you're not paid in money necessarily, but like one of the things that you have to do is just like, sweat equity exists and
Yeah.
you work for that. And I'm forever in his debt. I think it's so when like, so I was already in law school. And when I came back to Paris after that, I was like, okay, I need to shift. So that's always what defines, a lot of these choices is that there's an epiphany and then you're like, oh, I could be doing that. Like, and
Yeah.
so,
And you were attracted to these arenas. And I think I can really relate to that. I think early on in my career, I was like, that seems like a cool job, or like, I didn't even know that could be a job, right? Or like, that
yes.
seems really interesting. I was in the editorial and beauty and space and became really interested in that world and in fashion and publication and what all goes into Fashion Week. And then you're doing it and you're like, this is a lot of work, but I love
Yeah.
it. But I think there's like the glamorous outside and then there's the realistic inside. And I found that for me, no matter how fatigued I got, if I could remind myself like what initially drew me to it, what was interesting, that was
Mm-hmm.
always something for me to carry forward. But also there's that thing that's like the what's next. And I think you're very naturally curious. I mean, that's very
Mm-hmm.
apparent to me that there is that, you said, point of epiphany, which I think is perfectly said, right? You're in something and you're like, I could keep doing this forever. But what if, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the next step. So for you, coming from that world, having someone who really trusted you, which that trust goes so far.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think that that also helped you to start to trust yourself? Because I'm hearing this kind of sea change in you believing that you're meant to be in this world versus like, I happen to be here. Is that what you felt?
Uh, I don't know. I think you always have imposter syndrome,
Sure.
whatever you do, and it, like, I don't think gender or race or anything plays a role. I think that sometimes being empowered helps tremendously.
Yeah.
For you to be like, I don't have to question why I'm here, but also there's a lot of pretending. Like you just, listen, I'm here. I have the badge. Like
Yeah. I
I
have the
should.
email address.
I have the email. Literally, I have the email address. I have all the credentials, like, physically and metaphorically to be here. So when you and there's tons of stories, but like Chris and I and another team went to the 2010 African Cup of Nations in Ghana, and literally 2 or 3 days before we got there, we had to create fake lavaliers and like fake passes for us to get into the stadiums, and we had passes that were better than the real passes.
That's
They were like we
amazing.
were like looking at, I don't know, one of the graphic designers from the team, built them, and we had those passes, and they were like all the logos that looked like the real ones, and we went there and we saw that the official ones were like super bootleg, and we're like, okay, like, but to tell you how credentials work, that's so funny. That's what I think of whenever I think of credentials. But to go back to your question, yes, absolutely. When someone tells you you're good enough to be someplace, and then you actually you accept it, and then you work your ass off and make that a reality,
Yeah.
and everyone's happy, you understand that, okay, so like, I've done this one successfully. These people want to keep working with me. I need to, I just need to keep the work. And like, I think curiosity is the best motor you can have. Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't know a lot of curious people who are sad people,
That's so true.
you
And they're
know?
not boring either, which if you're bored, then you're boring. And if you're boring, then who
Exactly.
wants to hang out with you?
But even by yourself, if you're curious, you never need to. I mean, you never need to be surrounded by people. You're never superficial, I feel like. So curiosity is always a good trait in people, because you can go and discover the world. You can discover whatever you want to discover, and being able to be around people who are curious, who push you to go and be a nerd and nerd out on some certain things is always great. I feel like, meeting people, and that's why I love journalists, and I love like certain trades in life where people just get paid to explore more. Like I've always feel like Malcolm Gladwell is who I want to be when I grow up, and because it was always like when I realized who that person was, I was like, man, this is amazing. You just get to dive
Yeah.
to deep dive on a subject for like 3 months, and then just like you come out with an article that's like mind boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's work that I want to be in. But it's something that's interesting, in curiosity, and I feel like working at the time, with Chris helped me make that a reality, because when you are in law school, and then I interned at an insurance company. There's not, I mean, there's the people were lovely, but the work itself was soul crushing. So
Oh,
when
yeah.
you
I
go,
think if you saw my face, I was reacting to you saying, like, I knew law school because you said it, but then insurance company, I was like, whoa, this is really
yeah,
boring considering what we know about you now.
absolutely. But it was also interesting because you're like, oh, so people who work in insurance and who have to craft. So there was a legal department of an insurance company, and they had to craft, uh, uh, you know, insurance contracts for like competitions, and at the time when I interned, they were doing like so one guy was doing like a space. So he was doing like the different pieces of a spacecraft was going from Toulouse to Baikonur, and the other one was working on a sailing competition. So it was interesting.
That is interesting.
That was interesting, and they were crafting those contracts. I had no place being there because I learned a lot, but it was like as I said, like those people were passionate about.
Yeah.
One of them was really passionate about sailing, but it was just like the work itself was so painstakingly detail oriented that it became boring. I could not sustain that. But it was interesting to see, oh, there are all passions in life, and people can make that, uh, a sustainable life choice. But that was the moment I did one and then the other, I was like, okay, I need to definitely be in something creative, or something that I have to, that I feel like I can have a different day every day.
Yeah.
And
I think also, like, if you spend 4 seconds looking at your work, you see this real through line. And
Mhm.
I know that curation takes time, that it's not like you always are working on the things that are your dream,
Mhm.
projects, or that you're getting to do things, but you can really see that you have a love for fashion. You also have a love for football. You also have a
Mhm.
love for, the editorial space. And I think that finding that balance, I know that there's a lot of in between space that comes with
Mhm.
that, where you're not doing those things and you're
For
not
sure.
able to work on the dream project. But don't you feel that maybe that prepares you, right, to be that best version of you when you do get that opportunity to go and write for Nike? You're like, I've been waiting for this day.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that's cool is that passion. I feel like when you're passionate about something, you always push yourself to kind of give your career an angle to go there,
Yeah.
so to go somewhere. So yes, like when I was like, I had a year, like a gap year, where I had only two subjects at uni before graduating.
Hmm.
And we were like, a friend of mine was like, hey man, like, do you want to help me with this magazine? We want to launch this magazine that's like basketball, and it's, with like all the things that are happening outdoors, and then we want you to help us, because at the time I was writing a lot of articles for a bunch of different publications.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I had to build a vision, because literally they were like, yeah, we want to do this, and we have some money, and then we can distribute it through like these free magazines. Uh, you know, they had the same distribution system as Vice magazine at the time. So I was like, sure. And it took a few weeks and a few months, and then we worked on it. I wrote a bunch of things, and I was like, if this is, and the same, you understand business models, and then like when you don't have like that macro vision of like the space, you don't
Mm.
necessarily understand what your value can be and how you can be used. And then I understood at the time that, okay, so brands really need to have different touch points with their clientele. So at the time I was like, okay, so sports and culture and like, good photography, good art direction. So you start becoming curious. Like I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, but at the time I was like, okay, so like, what is this? And then again, when you're curious, you go talk to to people who have, built magazines, and then you start talking to the people you actually were working with at other magazines and ask them about who art directed this, and then like, how can I get in touch with these people? So you just like start having conversation and sharing conversations with people whose life work has been that, who found their path a long time ago, so they can give you shortcuts into building the perfect magazine. And then you're like, okay, so this is what a corpus is, or this is what a body of work is. I get it now. So now if I want to go from point A to point B, I don't have to do everything. I can actually be much closer to what I want to do by working my way through that. And funny enough, actually, like when you start working in like a lot of, and I feel like that's what makes Nike a very, very good client, and then also like a brand that keeps being relevant, year after year, is that very early on they identify, and I hate that word, but the cool kids in the city.
Hey, sometimes you got to use the word. I hear you.
So basically they identify you, and then you start getting, free shoes, and then you start getting invited to places that you don't even know exist, because they just create like, and I'm not talking about being an influencer or whatever, but like at the time there was no Instagram. So they had to be the weird kids and then the creative kids that are still in school, but that, they know that they're going to do something at some point that have some sort of clout, around their friends. And I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time they didn't have Instagram. So they had to have younger people that were just out in parties or at parties and identifying who was the coolest, the best dressed, and who was the weirdest looking, who was the most interesting DJ or whatever. And so Nike came from like that coolness factor. And then afterwards, when I worked in advertising, it was funny to bring it full circle and actually write Nike ads and like Nike stuff. But
because you knew about the underground side of Nike wanting to be the cool kids, right?
Yeah, but like that's I feel like a lot of brands want to be that, but they don't want to do they don't want to do the actual work. And I feel like Nike, I don't know who there, but understood that very quickly, that if you want to be cool, you have to have the underground cultures and all the subcultures, on lock. They need to understand what was happening in any city in a real way for you to, coolness at the time cannot come from a top down. It doesn't happen that way. It's always from the ground up. So that at the time I was lucky enough to be able to be in circles that were picked or anointed, and it was really cool. It had nothing to do with the work itself, but it was just like a way to see the perspective of the brand and understand why they picked some of us. And be like, okay, so I'm not interested in being like a cool kid professionally, but it would be interesting for me to work my way into places like this, even working at Nike and or things like that, which never happened. But it was more like, oh, there's a path. There is a path.
Yeah, you could be cool kid adjacent, but you don't have to be that.
Exactly. Cool kid adjacent is way less pressure.
I agree. I was just going to say that. I feel like, and you can be observational, you can be curious, you can absorb it, you can be in those spaces, but the pressure is off because maybe you're behind the camera and not in front of it, and I think that there's something beautiful about that. I mean, the word culture, so subjective, so prickly for a lot of people. It means so many different things. But I think when you talk about culture and subculture, I mean, where they're looking to, see what's next, where do you draw your inspiration from? I mean, you spoke about a mountain of things so far, which I love, that, growing up, with a museum in your backyard, to, your parents, being curious about the arts, but then also being in these spaces. When you think about today, where do you draw that inspiration from?
It depends. I feel like always you have to keep a balance between like conventional arts, I feel, and the youth. It's like you have to be humble enough to understand that the youth needs space, because we've been there. We've been the ones that wanted to do cool stuff, and we wanted the old guard to actually let us breathe a little bit and not be in our, like not trying to give advice. But just, I feel like you have to know what's relevant, but you also have to make sure that like what you like is what you like. So
Mm.
I don't necessarily put pressure on myself to know what's new, because I believe that like whenever you see something that's good, it's gonna gravitate towards you at some point or another. So I don't work in a I don't come from like a scarcity mindset where I'm like, oh my God, if I don't know the newest designer, that means that I'm out of whatever. I just feel like sometimes you've done the groundwork, you're friends with some of these people, you're friends with like some of the influencers of the city or even the world for some of them, but then you don't have to necessarily keep up with everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, we're like a couple of years away from me just like listening to music and be like, I don't understand. I don't get it. Like, I'm sure that's going to happen at some point in my life where I'm going to listen to the latest Playboy Cardi and be like, I don't understand this record. I don't understand why this is popular. And I feel like it happens to everyone. And it's the same with like paintings and artists. Sometimes I'm even designers. You're like, I don't get it. I don't know why,
Yeah.
and then so not making it, I don't have any pressure because that's not the nature of my job. It's more like usually I try to see what's relevant, why it's relevant, how, where's, what city. So you understand and you can explain to yourself the evolution of,
Mm.
but you don't have to be a fan of everything. It's like it's like music and cinema. You don't have to love everything.
Yeah.
I feel like last year with like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like when people were talking about it, there was like a real schism of like separation of everyone just like asking themselves like, do I like this film? Do I love this film? Is it it
Yeah.
was and 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 the conversations were really like fascinating to me. So
Yeah.
that's when pop culture does it, does the best. It's like everyone is like asking themselves, how do I feel about this piece? So that that it's powerful because it doesn't leave you, you know, uh, indifferent. So it's basically that. Like I draw inspiration from everywhere,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, I feel like I don't have enough time to go back to a time where there was no internet.
Oof.
Like
Yeah.
for example, right now, I would love to be able to go back to, and I think that like that's my next move is like going back to a library and just like starting to look at like books and artists and stuff that I feel like there's an era that is going to be killed because the internet is so powerful, and before that, if you're not a classic or if you're not like a juggernaut of an artist, you might be forgotten.
Yeah. And I think that also, I mean, you just brought back something that it's really special to me. When I was younger, I used to go to the library after school every day. I was a really avid reader as a
Mm-hmm.
student, and not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And I was reading 3, 4, 5 books at once. But I would go to the
Amazing.
library. Yeah, that's my thing. I would go to the library and after school and get the old newspaper reels. Now, I had no business looking at these, but there was I don't know if you remember this machine, and they would
Yeah.
take a giant reel, they'd put it in, and I would look and I would, okay, I'd love, for my birthday, but in 1942,
Yeah.
like
What
look it
happened?
up
Yeah.
and see what happened and see who was born that day and who died that day and what the advertising was. And I didn't think about it like that. I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
this is interesting. This is something
Yeah.
new. And, sometimes I'd ask to print out a couple pages of what I saw and I'd save my allowance to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really nerdy as I'm saying it out loud. I realize how nerdy it is, but it's also something that I don't think anybody who's, 10 years old now is doing. I just
I
don't,
don't I don't
because
I
you
don't
could
think
go
they
online.
yeah, they can go online, but also like when you say that it's nerdy, but it's not that nerdy because if you
Yeah.
look at like the New York Times, that's a business for them. Like they actually sell you the cover of the day you were born, and then they have it framed, and so you understand that there's an interest for that. I feel
Mm,
like analog. I mean, I feel analog the same way it works with photography and now all the filmmaking, that everyone is going back to an aesthetic that was like that had some character, that has some
mm,
cachet. I feel like you might not be too far off, that maybe 10-year-olds or 15-year-olds today might not be interested, but maybe when, maybe 10 years from tomorrow, people who have actually never they've never had like the stains of a newspaper because like they were
Yeah.
sweaty and people who don't even know that reality when they get to like being their mid-20s would actually want to have something tangible where
Yeah.
so I don't believe that this is necessarily done. I'm actually curious to see what libraries will look like in a few years.
Yes, because they do serve such a purpose, and
Hmm.
I always see them as a community hub. It's interesting now having a child, people are like, "Oh, have you checked out this story time at the library?" And I'm like, "Well, I haven't been to the library definitely since I lived in LA. I would go
Hmm.
in New York because it's beautiful, but
Hmm.
I haven't been to the library here, but sure, we could check that out." But I think there's an opportunity there to see, what people get to experience, but we look for these hubs in our communities to be
Hmm.
physical in person and in real life. And those are fleeting. I've seen companies popping up that are trying to create ways for people to come together in person, which
Yeah.
feels, we're going acoustic. We're trying to.
But it is interesting. Like I've read an article about I think it was in Denmark where people would older people would come and tell stories to younger people about books they've read,
Mm,
because of course like a lot of the older guard are very very lonely throughout the long winter months, and I mean that's just reality of capitalist society, but it was interesting to see like to give new purpose, and I hate to say it that way, but like to give new purpose to like an older generation
yeah.
that feel like they're useless. They're not useless, but there's such a demand to have everyone be useful to capitalism these days that people once people retire, they feel like they're an old car, and then so an old car can be an old car, or it can be a classic. If we look at all of ourselves and be like we could be a classic car, I mean, that's actually a much more, interesting way of looking at them. Like they have a wealth of knowledge. You can learn so much from them. Uh, but to go back to your point, a lot of the people who go to libraries, I feel like sometimes you buy a book and go to a library, but like a lot of people don't have the opportunity to share.
Mm,
You don't have the opportunity to actually share like these stories. I mean, like the book clubs, to me, I've never been part of a book club, but I'm seeing a few book clubs pop in since Clubhouse,
yeah.
on social media. I'm seeing, so there is a demand. There are definitely people who love books and knowledge, and who want to share that knowledge. I feel like most of the entertainment that we get today is based on books anyway,
Yeah.
and I hope that continues that way. But it's just a very interesting uh, way. I'm curious. I don't have any I not idea, but I don't have any preference, but I would love to see what like a librarian looks like in 10 years, now that like most of our books are going to be audiobooks soon.
Yeah.
Most like the not that the physical aspect of a book is more important than what's inside the book, but I want to know what libraries are going to be in a few years, like, because you know people have tablets now, so
Should we print the transcripts of this podcast and put it
we
into a
should.
book and put it in the library? Sneak it in. Yeah, we'll
we,
sneak
we
it
should
in.
we should sneak it in and just see how many people actually borrow it. I mean, actually,
Perfect.
I mean, yeah, my ego is not that big. I don't think people are going to learn so like much from this interview, but like you should do like a collective collection. Once you do 100, you can just like publish that. Though people will probably have use for that, I'm sure.
Yeah. We'll collaborate on the coffee table book to
Let's do
come.
that. Let's do
Yes, I
that
love
for
that.
sure.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned too, because I think that there's an opportunity. I think we have a lot of listeners looking to stay authentic with what they're inspired by. And I think that
Hmm.
you spoke about something that's so important to me is to not be like everybody else, to not worry about what everyone's doing. What advice could you give to someone who's maybe struggling with that tension between having their own vantage point and still wanting
Hmm.
to be relevant?
Wow. That's a great question. I think my feeling is, and that's something very cliche that you read a lot on Instagram, but like you cannot be anyone else but yourself.
Mm,
So you're the first you. So once once you understand that, and once you start valuing your experience and the sum of experience you've had, um, you can definitely and if it doesn't matter how, but you can make a list of things that make you uniquely you. You can make a presentation of how would I sell myself in a 30-second elevator pitch to someone else. But there's a reason why there's something that's called the mainstream, but there's always going to be people who are more relevant than you. There are always going to be people who are more not interesting than you. But let's say, for example, you have the opportunity to open a grocery store. You can be like a very small, specialized grocery store that like sells, Italian goods from like Puglia, and you're like tiny, and then you make sure that every single one of your products is very, very well made. Like you can have traceability that's crazy, or you can be, I'm not going to say a brand name, but you can be like a very, big grocery store with like, all the brands that everyone knows. At the end of the day, you guys are going to the same vacation spot, and you guys have the same problems of employees and like paying your bills. But you can make sure that you can have a living that you are happy and proud of. And it doesn't have to be like everyone, it doesn't have to be to the taste of, everyone does not love Italian food. So you can actually be like this. You can have your little store, like tiny store, and sell what you want to sell. We were talking about bookshops earlier. You can be a Barnes and Nobles, or you can be like a very nice library that's like selling, 10% of what Barnes and Nobles has, but like just like the selection and the curation is impeccable. So you will find your people. Like today, I feel like it's not about who you are necessarily, but like it's more like who you cater to. And then people actually try to find their tribes. People try to find people who are, who have things that are relevant to their interests. So you don't need to, I don't think that the chase is worth it. I feel like I might be wrong, but I'm not necessarily convinced that chasing relevance or relevancy is something that you have to do.
Yeah. And very few people can do that and stay relevant. So at some point, you're going to land on a space that people just see you as, and then you become pigeonholed. And maybe that wasn't even what your intention was, but all of a sudden, that's the kind of grocery store you have, or the kind of artist you are, or the kind of books that you write. And so why not just stay true to what you want the whole time? Absolutely. So when people land on you, they're landing on what's real as opposed to what you fabricated. And I think that is, it's great advice, and advice that, I think people struggle with imposter syndrome, or am I supposed to be here? But then the other thing is like, show up as you, and you're supposed to be there. Like the right people will come around you.
Absolutely. And authenticity is a luxury, to be honest. I mean, I think when I say that, I'm sure it comes from a place of privilege, but also like, I don't know how to be anybody else but myself. So like when you, and I'm sure it's like the case for 99.99% of the population, you cannot pretend to be someone else. So yes, I feel like, dig deeper into who you are and your interests and your curiosity, especially in like the creative arts, rather than trying to see what everyone else is doing. Because at the end of the day, the people you're copying, they're already doing their own path. So it's always tough I feel like it's always tough to have to play catch up, because at the end of the day, if it's not you, you cannot own that initiative of like, this is my idea, this is what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
And it must be nerve-wracking.
Totally. I mean, speaking of nerve-wracking, I'd be remiss not to mention that you made a pretty big move. You were at an advertising agency in Paris. You moved to Menlo Park to join Meta. I'm just going to call it like it is.
Yeah.
Paris to Menlo Park. Kind of a culture shock, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
You lose the walkability, that's for sure.
For sure.
I mean, when you think about what you just said about authenticity and showing up in places, can you talk about that transition? Because I think oftentimes, and I'll preface this by saying, I'll say especially Americans, I think there is this kind of romanticized version of like, I'm going to work in, another country. I'm going to expand, but there's obviously challenges and complications that come with that. Then you layer on top of that agency space going into big tech. That's another transition.
That is.
What was it like for you? What can you share about that experience?
I mean, it all comes down to curiosity. Honestly, it started with that because I worked for a few tech companies while I was in the agency world,
Yeah.
and it was interesting, and I was intrigued. And same, you always like smarts, so you like people who you're like, these are the people who are building the future for better or worse. They have
Mm-hmm.
the infrastructure. They're the ones that are deciding, what the world is going to look like. And then at the end of the day, when that offer comes in and you start talking to people, you understand. You're like, okay, so I can be in this side on the sidelines and just be a spectator, or I actually want to know how these people think, like what makes them tick. Are they as good as I hope they are? Uh, am I as good as I think I am? That's also that competition and that drive of like I want to see how I measure
Yeah.
in places like those. So that was Menlo Park was not a factor. Like at first, I was like, you know what, I'm going to the Bay Area and then we'll see. Um, once I arrived and I was in corporate housing in what's the name of that city? It was Sunnyvale. It was called Sunny Jail.
Oh
No
no.
offense, no offense to anyone who's from Sunnyvale, but it was very much all work, no play, and in a very interesting environment where people are like, I've never worked with people as that smart in my life. Um, people were so driven. It's a very interesting adjustment because when you come from creative, there's always the moment where you have to, give yourself some time to understand what's happening in culture, how when they need to understand what's happening in culture for them to stay relevant.
Mm.
And I feel like I don't know that like people who work in tech value that much. I feel like a lot of people who are engineers believe that like once they make something, people are just going to flock to it. And I feel like that's when a company like Apple understands like the importance of being in the zeitgeist of culture at all times, because
Yeah.
perception on who you are is important. Perception of the founder is important. Perception is reality, especially in that space.
Yes.
So it is a very interesting friction. Um, Menlo Park didn't feel like a real place for better or for worse. It just felt
Totally.
like you feel like you're in an experiment.
Yeah.
So, but also like there's one thing that you never get to experience when you're growing up, and then you go to high school in a city, and then university in a city. You don't have a campus, whereas Americans, they might not even understand how. I mean, you're from New York, but like they don't understand how insane and fascinating it is for us to look at like a Van Wilder film or whatever film that was happening on campus and imagine, man, if I had gone to school with like my life would be only with people I went to school, that would be incredibly different. And I feel like a lot of these tech companies like continue that life that was to them, I guess, the zeitgeist or like the zenith of like what cool life was, like being in sweatpants and just like playing ping pong and then working and getting
Having
um,
babes everywhere. No, okay.
oh, so this is the moment I get canceled.
Yeah. No.
uh,
That was not a setup. Yeah.
but no, but like it is very interesting culturally to see like, oh, this is how they, because for lack of a better term, that's how they imagine the perfect world to be. So
Yeah.
it is on the outskirts of a big city. Lots of fresh air, obviously, lots of merch, lots of company loyalty, and then like a lot of things um, that are not necessarily part of like the way I would have described a, a, a healthy work environment before. So
Right.
you learn a lot of things, and you're like, okay, so these people are onto something for a bunch of different places, and obviously, nothing is perfect. So sometimes you are isolated from the real world. You're isolated from a lot of things. These are cultures that are very different. There's not in my opinion, there are not enough cross pollination between brands. They're not enough. They're so in that competition with one another that they don't necessarily
Yeah.
understand how they could bring how well they could be perceived, and how much better their products could be if they were collaborating with one another. but definitely, I mean, I would only advise people to just, at some point, you need to, just get out of your comfort zone. Sometimes it's like, it's never a bad idea. You can always go and be like, okay, this is too much for me. And then you go back to something else. But like, you know, jump in the water, you might swim. Like that's
Yeah.
if there's an advice, that's the advice. Like, try it, try things. Like it's
Yeah. I mean, what do you think companies, and this is outside of just talking about Meta, but what do you think companies get wrong about their approach to hiring employees, I'll say cross culturally or from, there's such a attraction to global talent, but then
Mhm.
how you onboard someone, and I obsessively, coach executives on like, yes, you can hire the best people in the world, but if you can't
Mhm.
figure out how to get them to stay, to
Mhm.
retain your top talent, to really grow your people, what do you think that companies get most wrong, having seen so many different environments?
Um, so I'm gonna take before answering the question, I'm gonna take an example,
Great.
which I feel like is at the moment is one of the best adaptation examples we have, which is the NBA.
Mm,
So when you look at the NBA, David Stern, no longer with us, um, they started doing all these, camps all over the world, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, to grow the game, quote unquote. So the NBA is not going to move from the US. They're going to be 30 franchises. They might have one in Mexico, but like they have one in Canada. They're not going to move from North America. However, the last 5 years, the MVP of the NBA was a Serbian guy, uh, a Cameroonian guy from Cameroon, and then a Nigerian guy from Greece. So for the past 5 or 6 years, the best player in the NBA was not born in the US.
right.
So that shows you that you can go and find talent everywhere, but you actually need to make those people comfortable enough and for them to be successful for you.
Yeah.
Taking my own example, I have to give credit to Meta when I was coming in, because they were very patient. When I was coming in was like just after the Trump administration had gotten into power, so there were like a lot of friction as to how to get people, in the U.S. from how to get foreigners into U.S. companies. So there was a lot of patience happening. So I do
Mm.
give them credit for that. Um, but at the end of the day, when you look at all of these companies, I feel like one of the things that really, really, really that they lack is, I feel, foreign leadership. I feel like a lot of times they forget that when you get foreign talent, you need to get foreign perspective.
Yeah.
You cannot only get, like-minded people, or people, especially when I look at like a lot of these tech companies that are made of mavericks. When you look at, and I don't want to, it's like Meta, Google, Oracle, Apple, whatever. Whenever they get leaders in European and like, Asian countries, they took political leaders or ex-political leaders, which
Yeah.
is they don't take engineers. So you are literally changing the nature of your company. Uh, and I understand like everything they do to try to be, to settle themselves and to set themselves up for success with like taxes and, political climates and all that. But I feel like sometimes getting in people to stay at the company, you need to understand context. Like when I was at Meta, it was always interesting to see all these Indian engineers that they brought in, and the engineers had to adapt. And of course, you have to adapt to a country to an extent, but when you hire that much of a massive workforce from a
Yeah.
specific space, you do need to make an effort. I feel like American companies have had such a strong cultural stronghold on the rest of the world
Yeah.
that they did not feel that necessity. I feel like today, having TikTok being the most vibrant cultural force in the planet is going to shift, that a little bit. I'm curious to see how that works out. The same way in the music business, this is the first time in our lifetimes where the coolest music is not coming from the U.S.
Yeah.
Even though they're trying to co-opt that, you can, like, that's not happening there. So you will have to have, American companies and American record labels are going to have to move to Africa.
Yeah.
If they want to be relevant, when we talked about like authenticity being a luxury and all that, it is a luxury to actually have been born in New York City and have it be the birthplace of hip hop.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, hip hop is 50 this year, and so it's an old genre, and you have new genres. So people are going to have to move and go find it somewhere else, even if it's to bring it back to the U.S. for U.S. audiences. It is an interesting dynamic. And then to go back to your question, I think it's all about being adaptable. I think that you need to, if you're an executive that understands the need for your company to have a different perspective, and that perspective needs to come from someone from a Latino heritage, because that's a big part of your business. Someone coming from India, someone coming from Africa, Asia, whatever. Someone who's not coming from bi-coastal America or white, Europe, you absolutely need to give them space. You
Yeah.
absolutely need them. You need to comfort them in the fact that they belong, as you said earlier. You need to give them space for them to actually be able to develop a thinking, to understand all the context that they need to understand, so that their brain can function at 100%. And then the more trust you have, the higher the clip your intellectual clip is going to be. And I feel like certain leaders nail that, and some people really do not understand what that entails.
Yeah.
And a lot of at a lot of companies, that shows. You see some places where that are in dire need for a different perspective. And I remember, I don't want to put anyone under the bus, but I remember a few years ago a company trying to call, they had like a vending machine that they called bodega or something like that. And that's a very culturally relevant name, and that's like it's like a charged name, and they called it that, not knowing what that meant. And people on social media really rebelled against that. They were like, no, I'm from New York, and my bodega guy has a name, and he basically signs packages for me because I've known him for 17 years. And people really had a cultural response to that.
Yeah.
So sometimes being in a vacuum, and like and that's what happens in those places where there's not enough diversity, there's not enough, and I'm talking about, sexual orientation, race, religion,
Yeah.
like all of the things that actually create diversity are non-existent. So sometimes the people, and they're mostly lovely. I don't believe that people do things from a malignant, point of view. But sometimes it's just a lack of perspective. And in the vacuum, seal that you are. Like, I read that Zara a few days ago had to take back a campaign that they had with like, people wrapped that looked like the bodies that are happening in Palestine. And you were like thinking, oh, they're not a bad company. They're not trying to have people. I don't know that they're a good or a bad company, but what I'm saying is that nobody wants to sell things off of trauma. But I'm pretty sure people who made that decision were just all in their own vacuum of like,
Totally.
without a context. It's like at the time of like the smartest monkey in the jungle with H&M, you're like, as a black man, I felt offended.
Yeah.
As a marketer, I was like, I'm sure there were 4 people in that meeting, and nobody black was like, oh, you cannot compare a black kid to a monkey.
Right.
And that's it. That's one conversation. And that's what the context helps, culture helps, diversity helps in places like that. So we've had multiple examples, and I feel like sometimes giving people space, giving them confidence to talk, to speak up, trying to not tokenize them. Because when you're the only black person in a meeting, you can be like me, where I'm like I've been empowered years ago, so I do feel like I can do it. When you're much younger, when you're a young lady, when you're a gay man or something, that you feel like you're a double minority, sometimes you don't feel comfortable enough to say, hey guys, we should not be calling this product this way. We should not be doing this. To call out things in general.
Because
So
it's
I feel
fatiguing as well. I mean, you realize like also there's a fatigue that comes from that. And as someone who's, been in that position, but also has opened my mouth so other people didn't have to. I mean, sometimes
absolutely.
that's the opportunity that you see if you feel empowered, because people have emboldened you.
Hmm.
You've probably had to speak up when it wasn't even something that was representative to you. You're just like,
Hmm.
hey, is anybody going to say this? I'm going to say this, right? And I think, I
That's yeah.
mean, I thought back to when you talked about the H&M campaign, there's that LeBron James and, Giselle cover from
Hmm.
Vogue where they likened him to King Kong. And
To
they,
King Kong, yeah.
exactly. And that was extremely problematic and polarizing for a million reasons, but also just not actually having someone in the room to call these things out. And then
Hmm.
I think a lot of companies, and I've seen it in fashion, have tried to overcorrect, right? I mean,
Hmm.
Gucci did this. They got in trouble. Then
Hmm.
they went and they were like, we're hiring a global head of diversity and inclusion. And it's like, okay. And then since then, what have you all done?
No,
Crickets.
because nothing, because like these, a lot of these companies, again, they want to sell products, so they're not necessarily in the political business. So and a lot of what happens is people hire people who look like them, who
Mm-hmm.
think like them,
That's right.
who've been to the same schools as them. So the ways of thinking are more similar than they are not. So you actually have to make an effort to make sure that people that you surround yourselves or yourself with are younger, different, weird, that make you uncomfortable sometimes, that are outspoken.
Yeah.
And that's why being a leader today, I feel, is very tough, because if unless you are in certain businesses, you absolutely need to make sure that um, everyone can, and I'm not saying to put everything in a vanilla world, but like you need to understand that like these things matter, that people today can say, hey, you know what, LeBron James being portrayed as King Kong, not a good look for me, even though LeBron James was himself in that photo shoot and had
Sure.
people there as well. But you don't know what those people look like and what they feel like, or how Andy Leibovitz told them that it was going to look like. uh, and
And
also
again,
it
it
was
goes
it
back to
was
your comment on perception, right? It's the
yes,
perception. Agnostic of the intention, the
yeah,
perception is what remains, because the intention is
absolutely,
never spoken about after the shoot, but everything is felt from what they're experiencing in real
exactly.
time.
And it's
Um,
a gut feeling. People see that and they're like, oh my god, why?
yeah,
Why would you have like Giselle, who's like a tiny effete woman, with this man who is a freak of nature, but he's the way you make him look like a gorilla. And
yeah.
that's something that someone should have put the kibosh on at some point. But sometimes it happens, and then you have to go in and create these false narratives of like we're bringing in a head of diversity. You would not need one if your team was diverse enough.
And forget a head of diversity. Why not just have diversity at every level? Because if you have a head of diversity, they're only going to be able to affect so much. But I think you need
Yeah,
to build it in at every level and make it part of the conversation. And I
absolutely.
think, I mean, also talking about, you mentioned this with like the influence of music. I mean, I think that there's been this surge of interest in West African culture, specifically music,
Hmm.
art, all of it. And then there's like these moments where it's like, is it cultural plagiarism? Is it appropriation? Is it
Hmm.
exciting in some capacity to see, Senegal on the map, gaining attention that it's so deserving of, changing the perception? Like for
Hmm.
you, personally, how do you hold balance with that? Because it is so subjective, and I can see that challenge, and also the opportunity there.
I mean, as a Senegalese boy, I mean, I love that. I mean, I know that like there's a narrative in the U.S. about cultural appropriation and obviously the like the representation, and that's a very important thing when you grow up in like white dominating or dominated societies. And I understand that coming from growing up in Africa, I never had that problem.
Right.
And but also like we took so much from other cultures. We have the realities of like our own musical genres and stuff. But when I was a kid, I was listening to rap. I was not listening to traditional Senegalese music. I was
Yeah.
listening to rap music from Senegal, from France, from the US, from everywhere that I could understand. So it's like it is so to speak cultural appropriation, even though like all the older heads would be like, no, this is actually, this comes from like this particular genre of music in West Africa, in the Congo, and that's what like people were using that, and then the orishas in Cuba, and then like all those songs and like the genres that are in Brazil, and then came back from the Mississippi or whatever. You understand that culture, I feel, is fluid.
Yeah.
So I'm not an arbiter of culture. I'm not someone who will stop a kid in Mali because he's doing graffiti on a mosque,
Right.
because he's seen it somewhere. At some point, it's always youth. The youth is always going to win, and they feel like there's no reason for me to be obsessed with kung fu movies growing up in Senegal, but yet I was. There's no reason for people to these days in Senegal to be obsessed with like Indian soap operas and like Bollywood films. But at the end of the day, I love the fact that I hear on Senegalese TV that someone got a scholarship to go and study in India because he learned the language watching Bollywood movies over and over and over again.
That's incredible.
That is incredible. So I do love the fact that you have the Biennale of the Dakar Biennale, like putting forth a lot of the classical artists, like the painters, the plastic arts, the sculptors, and everyone who is doing like beautiful arts today, and pushing them to a global market and giving them opportunities. I love the fact that like a Ghanaian painter like Amarco Boafo can go on a Dior campaign, but he also can go to space. And then like a Kehinde Wiley, even though he's American, he's also kind of Nigerian and lives in Dakar, Senegal, and like gives so much opportunity to different artists. I love that. I love the fact that the world, and I feel it's long overdue, that the world is actually looking, and by the world I mean America, North America, and Europe is looking somewhere else, for freshness, for because Japanese art has been amazing for decades. African art has been amazing for decades. A lot of these people did not have the means, and now I love the fact that there's like filmmaking schools and like art schools and like stuff that is opening at a rapid pace today. When
Fucking
you're
finally, right?
finally, and long overdue, but like at the end of the day, I'm always more like, I'm always ready to embrace someone, and I'm not going to tell you, listen, it's too late. No, actually, if you're an American and you have clout and you have friends, no, bring them in. Like, come and discover all the art, the food, and like everything you can steal. I love the fact that like Ludwig Göransson, came to Senegal and like found Baba Mal and put that music in Black Panther. I
Mm.
love that. I love the fact that I'm like, we're a 14 million, people country, and then like the biggest black movie of all time, Black Panther, the music is literally traditional Senegalese music. Like that's insane, and that's a Swedish white man
Yeah.
that we owe that to. And I'm like, this is great. I'm not trying to look into how that happened and whatever. I know that Baba Mal got paid. I know that he was on that. He created a music festival that is in the east side of Senegal near the Mali border. And I love that for us. I love that there's a generation that is going to think, oh, the music of Black Panther was made by someone who never left Senegal. He
Mm.
made a career of being an artist that was in Senegal, that was respected in Senegal, that people love his music. He toured all over the world, but he came back home every time. And I love that someone who starts tomorrow is like that. I want that for myself. I don't have to go and live in London. I don't have to go
Yeah.
and live in New York to be relevant as a global artist. And that's tough. And that's amazing. You have Rosalia is the biggest pop star you have, or Bad Bunny, or I love the fact that the world's, epicenter when it comes to cultural relevance is not New York City or Los Angeles anymore. Even though that's where
Yeah.
you have the largest amount of money, like the most money, they need to look at us. And when I say us, I'm like like the geographical South, but I'm talking about Asia and Latin America at the same time. Like, it's pop culture is open. And yeah, as you say, finally. And even
Finally.
even as companies, I'm like, guys, you open your eyes, like your wallet is gonna thank you. Like
Yes.
you like Africa is the youngest is the youngest continent by far. That's where you should be investing, because
Yeah.
that's where your money is going to be made, and eventually. So
And as you said, the youth is always going to win. So it's like
always,
always. And
always,
so
always,
put your dollars toward, the people who are
absolutely.
actually going to, grow that culture and naturally be interested versus people who are going to die sooner. Let's just put it plainly,
Yeah, I mean, that's the right order of things, and we're gonna die someday. But yeah, it is. I feel like I understand the debate on cultural appropriation, and I respect it. I
Mm.
just feel that from my perspective, I love to see like new artists being represented by global galleries. I love to see people getting that stage finally, and I'm like, I love that. I love that. Like an Olaolu Sloan has made the Brits, or I don't want to be dropping names, but like it's just like he's 23. You have like African kids who grew up in Africa actually, and unfortunately for them, like people from my generation will never get the fruits of their labor, but still it's fine. Like having a 23-year-old getting those honors is amazing. So it's always good to see like that transition happen, and this is the first time in our lifetime, so I'm relishing in that energy now, to be honest.
I think that's really beautiful. I mean, thinking about the energy and how you're embracing it, and also knowing we have only so much time together, what goals are you pursuing right now? Like, what's bringing you to that next level?
um at the moment, I'm like excited. I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17.
Amazing.
So not really, but like it was it
But I
was
mean that you
funny.
did it.
Oh, that I did it. Yes, sure. I mean, but it was so, and I feel like I've been putting this off for a long time. So right now, I want to focus my energy into making films. So obviously, this is always like, as we were talking about earlier, like publications and stuff. It's always a side hustle, but I feel like the longer you live, the more things you have to say, and then the phenomenons that you see that you want to comment on in a way or another. I want to make movies, and then like I feel like that's the next step. I don't know if it's in 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, but like that's what I'm excited about. Like I want to be writing stories that interest me, and then hopefully we can find some people along the way that can be interested in those. But like that's what I want to be doing next, for sure.
And something tells me that those will be very interesting to people, not just you.
Hope,
I'm
hopefully,
here for
hopefully,
it.
hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing and what you're up to?
Um, I mean, they can find me on social. So it's at Masseër. So it's Madsear. So on Instagram, on Twitter. I have a website that's called massaerndiaye.com. So it's like Massaerndiaye. But if they go on my
We'll link it in the show notes too.
thank you. So
Yeah,
that
of
would be
course.
those that's where my portfolio, and then I do a lot of interviews for different magazines and like
Yeah, you do.
podcasts and stuff.
Those are
And
really
stuff.
exciting too.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's actually how I stay engaged in culture. So that's why I try to keep up with what's happening. So usually on social and that, and I'm gonna make sure that like more of my personal work, gets to my socials. Like that's my 2024 bet with myself, that I need to just like share more of the work that I've been doing like personally, rather than just like putting it on my website and waiting for people to find it. But
I think
yeah.
it's a good intention to set going into the new year. And I know maybe we all be a little more open about what we're up to, because it's hard
Yes.
to put it out there, because it feels a little scary, honestly. But I think you should be really proud of the work that you're doing. Massaër, what's
Thank you.
one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today?
I mean, the name of the podcast is Don't Fuck This Up.
That's right.
Um, I don't necessarily agree with like the "don't fuck this up." I mean, unless it's like very bad, consequences. I've always been inspired by the first agency I worked at had a mural that said a white wall is a wasted opportunity. And there was like the best advice I've ever gotten from someone working there was like, never ask for permission, but for forgiveness. And I feel like sometimes when people, it's so tough life is already so tough that if you go somewhere by thinking, don't fuck this up, you might actually rob yourself from the benefits of doing something. Because most people, when you are like a daredevil, you're like, don't fuck this up, which means you're already doing it. But a lot of people, by wanting to not fuck shit up, will decide with the conservative approach and not do something. Whereas, like, as I was saying earlier, jump, you might swim.
Yeah.
And if it's career and like moves, it's just, at the end of the day, it's just, you try something, you fail, and then you learn from it and you'll grow. So yeah, fuck this up. Absolutely. I think that would be my final thought.
I love that. Do fuck this up. Yeah, please.
Do fuck this up, please. Yeah, try it. And then, and then ask for forgiveness later.
I love that so much. Massaër, thank you for joining me today. This has been another episode of Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez, and we'll talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.